Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. Bobby Hams here with my review of Disney Plus's The Mandalorian episodes 1 through 3. This review slash discussion is going to be in a different, audio podcast style because I've been busy the past 2 weeks with updating my computer, working, and improving some of the channel's aesthetics. You might notice that the banner for this channel has changed quite a bit. And I did also change the banner for the News to You channel, which I also run and kind of do sometimes whenever I get the nerve to do some stuff on there, or really whenever I found some good news to put on there. And I also added the Patreon and Twitter links to those channels. The Twitter's been around for a while, almost a year really, but I never go on there, and it was under a different name. But I figured now, since I'm using the Bobby Hams thing, might as well just keep the social media all under one thing. And the Patreon was created as a place to store all of these Smallville videos that I'll have to eventually take down by January 2020. They all have copyright claims on them. I know a lot of viewers do like them. I think the Save Me video has something around 5 million something views on it, which I really appreciate that everyone enjoys them. But that one has a lot of copyright claims on it. And for some reason, the WB keeps on giving copyright claims on top of copyright claims. So for instance, those videos have been having copyright claims on them since I created them in 2011, 2012. But maybe every year or so, I get more copyright claims for those same videos. So I don't really understand that. So I created the Patreon as a place to store them for anyone who wants to go see them once I take them down in January 2020. But I also created a Patreon for all the other videos that I plan to create that I know YouTube will allow companies to claim. Fair use be damned. So quick side story here. When I first posted my Comic-Con video from July, I included some trailer footage from Preacher, which I found on YouTube. And when you know it, that AMC, who uploaded the video to YouTube, they blocked the video worldwide because of that footage. So I was like, for real? Up until that point, I was really excited to see Preacher and was willing to give what little, free promotion I could for its final season. But AMC didn't seem to want that, so I didn't acknowledge the show even existed until this moment right now. So, I mean, AMC can keep churning out its, sleep-inducing zombie shows, whatever. So that's really the reason behind the Patreon. I got to get rid of the copyright stuff, and some of the stuff that I want to create later on is going to be better served there on Patreon instead of just relying on YouTube to get the word out. I also rearranged my video recording setup, going for a more dynamic and a bit of a bokeh, photo effect in the background. Markiplier was really my inspiration in that regard. And there were a couple other things, but, I'll mention them at a later date. And anyway, this video is about the Mandalorian TV show, so let's switch gears to that. Some of the things, let's start off with the facts of the show. It's the first live-action Star Wars show, and it takes place 5 years after Return of the Jedi, but before Force Awakens. How many years before? I don't know. I don't remember. Maybe I read it. I don't remember. Anyway, the Empire has fallen, and the New Republic either is just starting out or is already sort of the new norm. Now, I believe the New Republic is all Kylo Ren's stuff, but I can't be certain. And it's an 8-episode season that costs around an estimated $100 million or $12.5 million per episode. Now that is, to me, just absolutely insane, okay? Because Game of Thrones Season 6 cost $10 million for 10 episodes. So that was their most expensive season, and it was just $1 million an episode. This thing is going for 12.5 per episode. Now, supposedly the Marvel shows are way more expensive than that, so Disney definitely has money to throw at their Star Wars fire, and it's not a good fire where it's like, oh yeah, he's on fire. It's not like NBA Jam fire right now. It's more like a dumpster fire, really, and they're just throwing money at it. So they got the money to burn. I say let them burn it. Jon Favreau and Kathleen Kennedy are executive producers on this thing. Now, Favreau brought Iron Man to the big screen, and he kicked off MCU. Iron Man is one of my favorite MCU movies. There are only about 5 of them. Iron Man is one of them. Kathleen Kennedy took a franchise that seemed impossible to screw up, and somehow she found the one way to make it just hated and reviled by lifelong fans. So, I mean, there's a positive and a negative there in those two being involved with this project. she was recently quoted as saying, I'm paraphrasing here, that George Lucas is unhappy with these latest Star Wars movies because he's having trouble letting go. Which, I mean, okay, it's a thing of like someone in charge who can't take the blame for something they're responsible for. You know what I mean? Which is not a good look. Not a good look. Now, I didn't like the movies because their stories were poorly recycled clones, like with Force Awakens, or just outright trash like Last Jedi and Solo. Oh my goodness, Solo. Such garbage. But anyway, the movie the TV show stars Pedro Pascal as the Mandalorian. Anyone who doesn't know Pedro Pascal, he was Oberyn on Game of Thrones, and he was one of the DEA agents in Narcos season 1 and 2. I believe it was in season 1 and 2. Great actor, really cool voice, really good actor right there. I'm just gonna call the show DeLorean because I like Back to the Future and I want to keep this gender neutral. All right. And what the hell even is a Mandalorian? I really don't know. I'm not too big into Star Wars lore. Was Boba Fett a Mandalorian, or bounty hunters just look that way in the Star Wars universe? Also, why do they speak English? Everyone speaks English. Everyone that looks like a human speaks English. It's kind of funny. It's always been a funny thing to me in these Star Wars movies. Because, I mean, with Doctor Who, and Star Trek, you get, like, these excuses. Oh, yeah, there's a universal translator. Or, the TARDIS is able to translate any language. So that's why everyone sounds like they speak English. But with like Star Wars stuff, it's like, how is the people in, like, these different worlds, they all speak English, except for the ones like Chewie and the Jawa who actually don't, and like R2D2, who just don't speak any kind of decipherable tongue. But everyone else speaks English without a problem. It's pretty funny. And I don't remember if Boba Fett actually ever spoke any language. But I was also always wondering if they didn't speak English, or if people didn't speak at all, did they have a sign language for the part of the population that can't speak? That's always kind of weird things like that go through my head when I'm watching these things. So on to the actual episodes 1 and 2 review. I did see episode 3 Friday or Saturday. I saw it yesterday. I saw it Saturday afternoon yesterday. And so when I wrote this up, it was actually, when I wrote down these notes, it was for 1 and 2. And I was basically really about to give up on the show. But then I was like, you know what? Let me hold off until I see episode 3. Then I'll do this all at once. So starting off with episodes 1 and 2, the positives that I found were the costumes, the creature production value really showed. That $12.5 million really shows there in the visual aesthetic of the show. It looks kind of like a grainy, Western. The designs are very intricate, and there's a lot of attention to detail as far as like the suits. His suit, DeLorean's suit, looks very heavy but mobile, and the creatures all looked very solid. They didn't look like they were just floating cartoons in space, or wherever. The ships all look very cinematic as they're taking off and flying around, and the lighting and the shading and everything looks very, very good. So some of that huge budget is very, very apparent in the visual representation of the actual show. And there's a lot of Star Wars Easter eggs. I had to watch a video on all of the connections to the movies and cartoons because I'm not really all that into all that stuff. I watched the movies. I really loved the first trilogy. The prequels, I can understand the prequels. I liked the Phantom Menace. What's it called? The second one, and then the third one. Didn't really care for them, but I get what George Lucas was going for with them. And then the new stuff, I really can't get behind it at all. So watching the cartoons and everything else wasn't really a big priority of mine. So I had to watch a video to see where everything connected to it. It's a pretty interesting video. I'll give it that. Very interesting. So to see how everything is represented in this video, in this show, because all of that stuff would have gone right over my head. If I hadn't watched the Easter egg video after watching the episodes, all of that stuff with connecting this and that and the carbonite and all that, that'll go on way over my head. Another thing that I found funny as a positive was the 4 stormtroopers surrounding DeLorean in that one guy's place where he accepted the task. Was kind of funny because, I mean, they're stormtroopers, so the 4 of them were surrounded. So the 4 of them surrounded him. So it's like, what are you guys actually planning on hitting? Are you actually going to hit anything? What, like each other? Because we all know stormtroopers can't shoot for shit. So why even was that even a threat to him? I don't think it was. And when the Jawa were walking around, saying that he had to relinquish, he being the Mandalorian, yeah, he had to relinquish his weapon in order for them to bargain with him for the return of the ship parts that they stole from him. He said, I'm a Mandalorian. My weapon is my religion, which I actually laughed out loud about at that line. So that was a pretty good line. And then the Jawa yelling out, Suka, 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 as they're like, I don't know if that's like their battle cry or their war cry or whatever, but they could, or maybe they just like use it as a celebratory thing, and they were just saying Suka, Suka, Suka. It made me keep thinking of the Suka Bliat meme from PewDiePie, last year or so, and I just couldn't stop hearing them say Suka, 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 Bliat, Bliat, Bliat in my head. Oh, by the way, shout out to PewDiePie for getting a shout out on The Good Place TV show last week. It's one of the most evil people on the planet.
What? Matt, call up the active files of 4 people still alive on Earth. Camila Al-Jamil, Donna Shellstrop, and her stepdaughter Patricia, and Stephen Pelias, a.k.a. Pillboy.
They were not part of the experiment. If he gets to bring random good people into it, I should be able to bring in random bad people. Call up Elizabeth Holmes. No. Henry Kissinger. No. PewDiePie.
Now that's a very smart and funny show. I don't give a regular cable TV or whatever network television. I don't give network television too many props these days because most of the content on there is really terrible. But The Good Place is one of the better ones. It really shines. It's a very smart and funny show. So on to the negatives for episodes 1 and 2. The story. I didn't know where the hell the overall story was going. If DeLorean, he's a bounty hunter. I get that. He's got to hunt down bounties. So if he's a bounty hunter, is he supposed to be a good guy or a bad guy? Now, everyone in the show he's supposedly a badass, but there wasn't any evidence of that. And there was really bad, like ill-timed humor that undercut that whole idea of him being such a badass. There was this annoying blue guy that was one of his bounties in the first episode. I think it was the first bounty that we see was this blue guy that he caught, and super annoying guy. Like immediately annoying, just annoying. And the humor made me think of The Last Jedi, where it's just like, why is this even in here? It just eliminates any kind of tension or whatever they were going for. The humor just didn't belong there. And there was a lot of more talk, just more talking about how badass he was than actual action. You know what I mean? It's like someone walking around saying, oh yeah, that person's really badass, but then you never seen that person actually do anything to justify being called a badass. There's a lot of that going on with those first 2 episodes, and I just didn't see it. And it didn't seem to me like he was any more resourceful or dangerous than anyone else. He had a pretty cool looking outfit, and the mask, I really liked the mask, the helmet, but really like whatever. And like there's no empire anymore. Like I said, this whole thing takes place after Return of the Jedi, so there's no empire. So who is the bad guy, or what is the bad guy? If DeLorean is supposed to be the and protagonist in the show, he's supposed to be the good guy. Who is he going up against? And I couldn't figure that at all in these first 2 episodes. And I know it's still early. Other shows revealed their main bad guys, at different points of the first season. But other shows are at least 10 episodes and average 42 minutes. This show, well, I'll get to the timing. I'll get to the time stuff a little bit later. DeLorean isn't in that boat right now, and it's drifting further from the shore of interesting storytelling. So who's the bad guy? What's he going up against? No clue. He's just some guy walking around, I guess, collecting bounties for the moment. Carl Weathers is in this show. He didn't look to have any more to do beyond the role of a brief cameo. Later on, he does become more of a broker or bounty hunter, negotiator guy. I don't know. And when I was watching these first 2 episodes, I thought maybe he's ultimately the bad guy. And it gets revealed that in episode 8, DeLorean goes back to Weathers to collect payment for the final bounty or whatever. But then Weathers slips on these lightsaber boxing gloves and knocks out DeLorean in the first round, And then he stands up and he's like, yeah, his real name is Darth Apollo. And then the theme from Rocky plays. Just complete nonsense. This is what goes on in my head when I'm watching these things. But anyway, going back to like old stuff, this show also seemed to still be relying on content from the original trilogy, which I really much cared for. That became really apparent to me when I saw, what the infamous now Baby Yoda, who is not Yoda and also is not Yaddle. I guess Yaddle was someone from the prequels. I don't know if Yoda and Yaddle banged or whatever. But Baby Yoda uses the Force, and I was just like, okay, what? So this takes place after like I said again, this takes place after the Return of the Jedi, before the Force Awakens. But this Baby Yoda thing, creature, guy, person, whatever, can use the Force also. So I was like, okay, sure. And it's not Baby Yoda, I'm certain of that, but maybe it's Yoda's Mexican cousin, Yodale. It's like Yoda's Mexican cousin, Yodale, or it could be a Swiss nephew, Yodale. Now, non-hardcore fans like myself are probably the reason why these connections to the original trilogy are in here. It's kind of like Disney saying, hey, look, you may not know what the hell even the Mandalorian is, but you remember Yoda, right? And the Force? Remember how Yoda did the thing with the ship? Huh? Remember? Do you? Come on. There's more of that here. Well, come on. Please watch this over budget show. That was Mickey, by the way. So another negative of the show so far in these first 2 episodes was the scale of the show. It felt very small. Even though DeLorean traveled to maybe a handful of places, it just felt very claustrophobic and just felt very constrained. And I mean, there was like the outside, the ice world where he was in the first episode where he picked up that blue guy. But other than the ice world, everywhere else looks basically the same. Everything's like a desert, rocky, dusty, mountainous, outdoorsy thing with some brown and some light brown and some yellow for the sun. And it all looks very, very much the same. And it's funny because there's so much detail seem to be paid to the costumes and the monsters and the other creatures that the money that they're spending on this thing doesn't show up in the actual environments that these things occupy, which is just mind-boggling to me. And like, there's this one scene in episode 2 where he's trying to learn to ride this, I don't know I forget what it was called, a Pugo or Ugo or whatever. It was a CGI animal that he was learning how to ride. And like, the thing, it looked okay from some angles and it looked kind of terrible from other angles. But just to sidestep that for a little bit, he learned to ride this beast in like 2 minutes. Because the thing with the second episode is that the Jawa had stripped his ship of its parts, so he went after them, but he needed help from this local guy, forget what his name was, and the guy was like, you have to learn how to ride this creature in order to get to where you're going, whatever. Seems like plot convenience. So anyway, he was trying to ride this beast and it kept falling off. And then the one cat was like, hey, you're a Mandalorian. And then boom, DeLorean tamed the beast and was riding it like a professional. I was like, huh? How the hell does that work? But then I was like thinking to myself, you know what? That's exactly how I learned to ride a bike. I kept falling off. And then some stranger reminded me like, hey, you're a human. Then boom, I was riding a bike like Dave Mirra, 5 years old. But I didn't stop at bikes, Every time I wanted to learn how to ride something, I just remind myself, hey, you're a human. And boom, I learned to ride a bucking bronco like a rodeo champ, And it's like, as long as I said, hey, you're a human, I was riding elephants, tigers, meerkats, ladybugs, even honey badgers. It didn't matter. I just had to remind myself, hey, you're a human. And boom. And the thing is that the honey badger, you thought the honey badger didn't care from that video from a while ago. But as soon as I said, hey, you're a human, boom, honey badger cared. That's all it took. The other thing about the show with the first 2 episodes was the pacing. The pacing is so terrible. Really, really bad pacing. It was just felt so dreadfully slow. The first episode was only about 35 minutes long. 35 minutes. For a Disney Star Wars episode, and the second one was only about 30 minutes. But the third one did rebound a little bit. The third one's about 37 minutes, and I couldn't get over that fact how short it was, because every other dramatic show that I watch, even the stuff on the CW, okay, The Flash, Arrow, all that stuff, even they run for 42 minutes at least, with commercials. Now you're telling me that this show on a subscription service platform with no commercials is putting out 35, 30, and 37 minute programs? Come on. There's no way. there's no way that it can be like a real thing. And like, even though that they're so short, the first episode felt like an hour, and then the second episode felt like it was 50 minutes long, but not in a good way. You know what I mean? There was one decent shootout involving another bounty hunter, and then the thing with the Jawas ended up in a chase from episode 2. Those 2 parts were very good, but those were the only 2 memorable action scenes in over 65 minutes of footage, which was like terrible. And the rest of the time was spent on like walking and really just uninteresting and dull dialogue. And like, I kept thinking to myself, do they not have enough content for more time? Like, how is it possible that Star Wars has 40 years plus of content and just, you know, information you can draw from and characters you can build up and et cetera, and you're putting out, as your first show on your streaming platform, you're putting out 35-minute episodes, 30-minute episodes? Something seems off to me about that. So I started to think, like, are they intentionally making them short to force viewers to stay tuned? You know, like, oh, there's a little, like, breadcrumbs, feeding people breadcrumbs, a little bit here, a little bit there, keep them going right up into, I don't know what they're leading into, but I don't get why the episodes are so short. The second episode with the Jawa went on just shy of forever, and like, the only thing of importance that came out of it was, you know, orale. That's the only thing that came out, that Yodale could use the Force. But like something like him and the negotiator guy rebuilding his ship in an overnight montage, that was necessary though. You know, I didn't understand it. So that was the first 2 episodes did not give me hope of, they did not fill me with decent feelings of enjoyment as far as this program was concerned. So I just like, you know what, let me give it until episode 4, see if everything picks up. Fortunately though, in episode 3, it seemed like the story started to pick up, well, whatever story it is started to pick up and started to take more of a solid form. And so the positives outweighed the negatives in episode 3 from this past Friday, because the pacing improved drastically, right? It was only 37 minutes long, but it did feel like 40, which is pretty good. You know, it didn't feel like it ran on forever, but it didn't feel like it was a complete waste of time either. Well, short waste of time. Still wasn't actually 40, which I don't understand why, since they obviously do have money. So I really don't get that at all. But I can finally see some glimpses of where the story is going. So in episode 3, after delivering Yodale to the underworld guy, getting paid and then getting another bounty, DeLorean gets a conscience and worries what will happen to Yodale. He breaks the guild code. He's part of a bounty hunter guild, by the way. And the other Mandalorians are hiding out in a place they call the covert. Why are they hiding out? I don't know. That hasn't been revealed yet. So while he's cashing out his bounty and he's getting his armor upgraded, there's a bit of a tiff with other DeLoreans because he's working with the people who once worked for the Empire, I believe. And that scene was such an obvious setup for later, you know, when the other Mandalorians come out of hiding to help him escape. He does get more flashbacks of the day his parents were killed. That's something that happened in the first 2 episodes. Definitely happened in episode 2. Maybe it was 1. I don't care. But definitely happened before. And it's kind of like a war scene or some kind of an attack scene where he's escaping with his mom and dad and he gets locked in a box. That kind of gets expanded on in episode 3, where it shows the specific droids that were attacking his city or village or town or whatever. And so I guess that's going to be a regular thing now, the flashbacks, you know, whatever. So it looks like the story is going to be about him protecting Yodale from the underworld, the bounty hunters guild who are now after him, and who or whatever the stormtroopers were working for. Yeah, so it's really kind of like John Wick 3 meets the X-Men comic story Messiah Complex, where Cable protects Hope Summers from Bishop. And there's something that the buyer wanted extracted from Yodale. So at first I thought the New Republic was the actual client, but then Carl Weathers advised DeLorean to complain to the New Republic if he really was worried. So maybe they aren't the big bad, but I wouldn't mark them off as suspects just yet, because if they knew Yodale had force powers and they knew Vader had force powers and they knew the Empire was defeated by someone with force powers, then it makes sense they'd go after the baby cousin of the guy who trained the guy that fought against Vader. I mean, that just seems to make like logical sense to me. I may have it all wrong, but I think the New Republic is ultimately behind this whole kidnapping plot with Yodale. Now, unlike the first 2 episodes, his rescue of Yodale and the subsequent street battle he has with the guild showed me why he has such a reputation of being a badass. You know, this is what I needed to see in the first 2 episodes. You know, just him handling his business and just being able to take on multiple enemies from multiple directions by himself. That's what I needed to see. And this episode 3, showed that, you know, perfectly. And then, like, the stormtroopers, true to form, couldn't hit anything. You know? Or maybe they did hit him, but because of his armor upgrade, it tanked the shot. So, but I'm gonna go with stormtroopers couldn't hit anything. The only real negative that stood out was the way Carl Weathers was saved. After getting aboard DeLorean's ship and demanding that Yodale be returned, DeLorean shoots him in the chest, really in the heart. But Carl Weathers, he weathered that shot because he stored a brick of the bounty in the exact place he was shot. Now, to be fair, he did reveal to DeLorean where the brick was when he was bragging about how much money he made as a result of DeLorean's work in retrieving Yodale, but it was still a tired trope for how someone cheats certain death at close range. So I didn't really care for that. But considering that was the only major thing that I found wrong with the episode, it's a massive improvement from episodes 1 and 2. So episode 3 was a it overshadowed 1 and 2 in almost every way. And the pacing of episode 3 makes a majority of those first 2 episodes really seem irrelevant. Like, so far, there's only been about 90 minutes or so of content, and most of it, especially a great portion of episode 2, could be cut and combined really into one episode, and the story would still arrive where it is right now. You know, I think my lack of content theory is really true, because Disney doesn't seem to have a lot of original content going on right now. I really don't know why they even launched this thing. Well, I do know why. It's all for money. But anyway, as the only program clearly made for adults, well, maybe not adults, but older than teen demographic, is DeLorean worth buying a subscription to Disney Plus? I don't think it is. I haven't seen any other offering promoted as much. So it's clear to me that The Mandalorian is supposed to be the beacon that attracts wayward viewers to the Disney shores. Disney Plus has been around 2 weeks now and has gathered 10 million subscribers. So that's an achievement in itself. But I think those subscribers are mainly due to a nostalgia. Their library is full of old animated and live action movies that take a lot of adults back to their childhood. However, stripping away that nostalgia and original Star Wars trilogy connections, this space western bounty hunters thing kind of meanders around in circles really right now. It's not really, doesn't seem to be really going anywhere. Even with episode 3's ending of him taking off and escaping whatever planet he was on and flying off into space, doesn't seem to really have a point right now. It's very appealing visually, but the plot is developing far too slow for such a new show. I mean, it took 90 minutes of viewing time for me to get interested as a casual fan of Star Wars. And so, like, take it this way. If this was a 2-hour long movie, you know, 135 minutes, let's say, to keep the math simple, because you got 2 hours, so you got 120 minutes for actual movie and then 15 minutes for credits, intros, etc. So you got 135 minutes. So it's 45, 45, and 45, your first, second, and third act. That 90 minutes represents the entire first and second act, right? Which leaves 45 minutes for the villain to show up, the villain's motivations to clash with DeLorean's motivations, right? For DeLorean to be defeated, then come back better than before, win, learn something new, or grow in some way, and then credits. It's what I'm saying is they got to start speeding this shit up, or casual fans won't stick around just for the nostalgia, because there are too many other options they can consider. I mean, with Netflix still reigning as king of engaging original content, Disney can't afford to just like, we've already got the fans and they'll stick around regardless. Like, that's not the case at all. That's not the case at all. Like, the season will be at the halfway point next Friday, so I'll hold off on any other judgments until the very end, because the show could get significantly better, and I'd regard episodes 1 and 2 as Yodale just learning to walk, which would be awesome if it does improve. Since it started so poorly, though, in my opinion, the series could get significantly worse, and I'd have to regard episode 3 as an accidental success surrounded by failure, because we all know Disney Plus was launched simply
for the love of money.
And that's what I think of that. I'll do another one of these after the next 2 or 3 episodes, depending on how interesting I think they are. There really wasn't much for me to cover with just the first 2 episodes due to the fact that I'm not super huge into the lore, and most of the eye-catching videos I saw on YouTube were either complaining about the horrible pacing or Star Wars Easter eggs, and I'm not about to go research Star Wars just to find those Easter eggs on my own, and I didn't want to immediately bring up the pacing problem until I had a possible turning point to contrast it with. I think episode 3 was that turning point. I really do. Jon Favreau writes these episodes, and he's a good storyteller, but he hasn't directed an episode yet, hence the uneven pacing. Full disclosure, I don't like the business side of Disney one bit. Corporate Disney is as cynical and greedy as any other corporation. I don't think I'll ever, never not see them as the evil empire in Hollywood. That's just a thing. With that said, though, I grew up watching their animated movies and own most of them, so I am a fan of their original content, at least up until the mid-90s, before they started to try to make everything into a sequel, like Hercules 2 and Pocahontas 2 and Hunchback of Notre Dame 2, and what was it, the one that had Lion King 2.5, and ugh, Jesus. Now, I'm not a fan of the MCU, but Favreau directed the first Iron Man movie, which is one of my favorite MCU movies, so I sincerely trust that The Mandalorian's content, their plot, character development, etc., will get better as time goes on. That's going to do it for this video. This is Bobby Hams signing out. Yodale, Holmes.